and welcome to the Real Biz Lab Chronicles, where we discuss all things business, branding, and life. I'm your host, Tracy Fryer. My guest today is Kent Matla. He's the chairperson for the Australian Innovation Management Institute, and today he's here to share his journey. Kent, welcome.
Thank you, Tracy. Great to be here.
Yes, I am very excited, Kent. I'd love to know a bit more about your background before we get started.
On the Australian Innovation Management Institute, I can sort of briefly mention, we're a sort of a not-for-profit membership-based organisation, sort of with the deep purpose of raising awareness and understanding of innovation and innovation management. And we're part of a global organisation called the Global Innovation Management Institute, which is based in Boston, in the US. It's the sort of largest professional organisation for innovation practitioners and standardisation organisation, providing sort of ISO accredited, programs and certification for innovation practitioners. But yes, I have a number of other hats that I, wear as well, being an entrepreneur and being sort of in the innovation space.
Yes, and I'd love to discuss those further. So if we go all the way back, Kent, where did it all start? Was it sort of, did you have any entrepreneurial traits at school, or what kind of started that journey for you?
So going right back, I suppose, my father, so I'm adopted and come from a First Nations heritage, but my adopted parents sort of brought me up in the sort of south of Western Australia in Albany. So I was born in Perth, but grew up down there. My adopted father was a business person. He had his own business, and so I suppose I sort of was involved as a very young age in sort of going to his. He had an electrical business, so I went down there as a young kid, sort of learning what he was doing and learning more about, I suppose, the traders and sort of getting involved from that perspective. It's probably started back then, and then as I sort of progressed in my life, I've been involved in, I'll mention some of them in a minute, but involved in a number of different areas that sort of took me on that sort of pathway.
And what was your first business that you had?
So I started. So I left school at 15 and year 10 and worked and did an electrical apprenticeship with my father, adopted father, and sort of did that for a number of years in Albany. For I think it was about 4 years. Moved back to Perth when I was 18, and sort of moved out of home and came back to Perth and worked as an elevator technician, sort of in a specialised area in the electrical area and mechanical area. Sort of did that for a few years, and then my first that was sort of my second job, and then I really took a big twist. I was very heavily involved in the Chinese community here in Perth, mainly through sort of martial arts, and got involved in the Chunghwa Association, which is a Chinese sort of cultural association here in Perth, some years back, and sort of learnt a little bit of the language at the same time, but mainly focused on lion and dragon dancing. So I was sort of heavily involved in the Chinese culture.
Very cool.
Teaching young kids at the Chunghwa school martial arts and so forth. So I sort of did that as sort of a bit of a passion, and through that I then found that I wanted to know more about the Chinese culture, and so other than learning a bit of the language here in Perth, I then sort of backpacked around China. This is 1991. Backpacked around China for a couple of months by myself to sort of get a better understanding. Did a few more trips to China, and then at the beginning of 93, I was offered a job. I was sort of one of those moments in life where you're at the right place at the right time, or the wrong place at the wrong time. But it was definitely the right place at the right time then, and ran into a couple of local people from Perth. One happened to be the chairperson of the Chunghwa Association at the time, or president, and he said, I sort of ran into him in the lobby of a hotel in Beijing, and he said, we're going down on a train to this smallish city called Taiyuan, which is the sort of capital of Shanxi province, 500 kilometres southwest of Beijing, and we're sort of going down there because the Australian Trade Commission, Austrade, is going to be opening an office. Would you like to come down with us? I said, why not? So jumped on the train with them, went down to the official opening, and then that was and sort of senior trade commissioner from Austrade in Beijing travelling down with us, and it was a sort of government government to government sort of official opening, which was fantastic. It's a couple of days down there, and on the train way back to Beijing, they said, like, the office is open now. It's fantastic. It's all official, but we don't have anyone to work in it. Would you like the job?
Oh, great.
And so, oh, wow, yes. I said, I'd love to. I said, I always thought, traveling back and forth to China was to help me understand the culture, but living in China was the sort of my next step, was to sort of move there. Did that. So yes, I left my job as an elevator technician with it was Boral Elevators at the time. I had a house probably only for about 18 months that I was renovating, and I sort of came back to Perth, put my house on the market, quit my job, and packed my bags and moved to China in '93, and worked for that office. I was the chief representative of a small company out of Perth that was focusing on technology and trade, sort of developing technology and trade in between sort of mainly between Perth and China, and also the post manager for the Australian Trade Commission. That was my third job, and sort of that took me on a totally different country.
Wow.
My basic Chinese, I threw myself in the deep end, right? So my basic Chinese had to improve really quickly. I was working now in a purely business field, or also in some ways a cross-cultural business field. I had to learn very quickly on the job.
Definitely. And how long did you say you were there for?
So I was working in that role as chief representative for that company, as well as post manager for Austrade for 3 years, and then I moved to Beijing in beginning of '96. So I was there for about 3 years. Moved to Beijing and worked for the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in the Australian Embassy in Beijing as an economic and political research officer. And also looked after federal minister visits. I moved to Beijing in '93, and I stayed in Beijing for 18 years. So I was in China for 21 years all up.
Wow.
And then sort of worked in the embassy for a couple of years because I wanted to sort of understand more about how the government relations were working between Australia and China, because I liked the commercial side of things and what I was doing with Austrade. I wanted to know more about the government side of things. So I did that for a couple of years. I left the Australian Embassy, I think it was end of '97, and then set up my own advisory firm in China, between Perth and Beijing, basically, and sort of that's when I started my own business, so to speak.
Yeah. And Kent, I want to ask, do you know your birth parents?
I do now, yes. After moving back to Australia, this is in 2014. I moved back to Perth. I, had the opportunity to sort of apply through post adoption services to then sort of find out who my birth parents were, and took about 12 months for them to get back to me with the details. And then that's when I found out my Indigenous heritage through my birth father's side, so I'm sort of, my heritage is Yamaji, which is sort of the Geraldton Midwest area from my birth father's side, and mother is originally from the UK, and so I've met my birth mother and keep in contact with her. But my birth father, unfortunately, had passed away not long after I found out. I found out his name, but then I've only since been in contact with other family members. So it's a very large family, and a number of aunties that I'm now in contact with, and a cousin. So,
fantastic.
So I'm sort of learning more and more about it as I connect with more family members, which is great.
Yes, and I think that's so brave as well to go on that journey. Would you be comfortable to share with us, Kent, as an entrepreneur, being adopted, meeting your birth family, how does that impact one's identity?
Well, that's a good point. Growing up, my adoptive parents, my mother was born in Australia, but originally had sort of UK European sort of heritage. But and my adopted father was Dutch, and so growing up, I sort of associated myself with those sorts of heritages. Growing up, but obviously I knew that it wasn't obviously my true heritage, and so I was always interested to understand. And I have two children, and sort of grown up a bit now. But with children, doctors had asked me, do I have any anything in the family medical wise? I would say I didn't know, and then my children not knowing either was like, I always also wanted to sort of understand, is there anything I need to know about?
And of course.
that was part of it. But obviously very keen to understand my heritage and exactly who where I came from. So understanding that, and especially from the Indigenous heritage, Aboriginal heritage that I found out afterwards, I was amazed and so interested, and now sort of obviously have a strong connection with my sort of Indigenous side of who I am, and that part of the family, which I'm, like I said, learning more and more about, learning more about, but meeting more and more family members, which has been fantastic. And I'm meeting an auntie, for example, next week.
Great.
Who's now originally from Perth, obviously over this way, but that's one of my birth father's many siblings. He was the eldest, so I'm meeting her for the first time next week, which I'm looking forward to.
Incredible.
Meeting face to face is fantastic. So.
Yes. And Kent, at what age did you find out you were adopted?
I knew from a very young age. I have a sister a couple of years younger than me that was also adopted from different parents. So we both knew from very early ages that we were adopted. It just our parents, adopted parents, had told us, but just didn't obviously know the background at that stage.
Yeah. Yes. And what's been the greatest discovery reconnecting with your roots?
Obviously the Indigenous side for me. That's it's absolutely amazing, and I'm so proud that I have that heritage, and learning more about it every day has been fantastic. And now I do play. I identify as an Indigenous Australian, and I also involved in sort of three of my roles very strongly within sort of the Indigenous side of things. So I do a part-time role as the West Australian State Manager for First Australians Capital, which is sort of a large not-for-profit finance company that provides patient finance or patient facilities to Indigenous business looking to grow. And I also sit on a board here in another not-for-profit organisation called First Nations X, which assists. Basically focuses on empowering Indigenous startups, bridging the gaps between sort of connections, capabilities, and capital. And then also, I'm a member of the Black Angels, which is sort of an early stage initiative of sort of building an Indigenous or First Nations angel investment group across Australia. So I'm sort of involved there. So in the last few years, I've obviously got much more involved in the Indigenous or First Nations side as well, which has been fantastic.
So were you aware of your Indigenous heritage when you, I guess, were part of those organisations? Or excuse my ignorance, I think one has to be of Indigenous heritage to join?
You don't need to be. I sort of, well, for the Black Angels you needed to be, but for the other two organisations it wasn't really necessary. But obviously that was very helpful. No, I knew my heritage before I took on those roles and got involved in those organisations. Yeah, so it was very helpful for me to sort of get more involved in the culture and country and sort of learn more at the same time as well as get involved in those sorts of businesses, which is fantastic.
And Kent, I'm curious, wearing so many different hats and living such a full life, what are your secrets? Like, do you have a set time management schedule? Do you have a team? How do you do it?
So yeah, bit of a schedule, I suppose, and I'm quite organised in what I do. I sort of also founded two other businesses that are operational. One called Triangle Equity Partners, one called Triangle Capital Partners. Triangle Equity Partners does a number of sort of advisory work, mainly with startups to scale-ups, mainly scale-ups, and we have a program that launched last week that we do every year that's sponsored by a number of local and state government organisations around scaling up businesses. So there's a lot of obviously emphasis and work happening in the startup space in West Australia ecosystem, which is fantastic. But we also do a lot of work in scaling businesses. So yeah, I wear a number of hats, as you said, but I'm very organised, and because I suppose it comes down to sort of the work I did in China for many years. It's very full on. There's high energy sort of environment and economy, and so moving back to Perth, where I found it a little bit slow, so to speak. Keeping my mind and self busy was having all these various roles is one way of doing it. So I sort of prioritise those as and when needed. Like I said, with First Australians Capital, I work there part time. The other ones are sort of voluntary or organisations that I've founded that I play a role in, and I sort of
Yes.
organise my time around what I need to do for each organisation.
And do you find that your heart tends to lean towards one of them?
Or it really is between. I mean, my passion is really in the innovation space, and obviously that can play in what I do in the First Nations space as well. And the First Nations
Yes.
space is obviously the other part of my passion. So it's really sort of split between the innovation, what I do in innovation and innovation management, as well as what I do in the First Nations space. It's sort of split between both. The passions are in both of those areas.
And do you find, Kent, there's a set of core values that you have that are across all of those?
Well, the core values that I have are it's the same. It doesn't matter. It's true to myself. I put 100% into what I do. I mean, the Australian Innovation Management Institute, or AMI, for example, I'm the founding chairperson, and we don't have, as a not-for-profit organisation we only launched in September last year. I spend a lot of my spare time. Well, I don't have a lot of spare time, but a lot of my time in sort of building that organisation, because I'm very passionate about what we are trying to do with that institute, and I see massive gaps in the innovation ecosystem, not just here in Western Australia but across Australia, and I think we can play a massive role in that. So if I sort of commit to something and want to do something, then one of those sort of core values is that I put 100% into 100% or 110% into it, and sort of work to make that happen. And so I've dealt obviously cross-culturally with China, and I've worked with both international and Chinese clients over the time. So when I set my own firm up in China initially, I then merged it with a larger group that out of a boutique corporate advisory and investment banking firm out of Singapore. So working in investment banking and corporate advisory for a number of years before moving back to Perth. I was working globally with Chinese and international clients, sort of working on all sorts of various sort of finance and investment transactions and mergers and acquisitions, etc. Worked internationally, worked across cultures. Obviously, the First Nations side of things now is sort of been happening in the last sort of 5 years, and learning. So one of the other values is I like to learn. So I always like to learn. Or I don't think we should not learn.
I agree.
It's an important thing. So one of those things, like as I mentioned, I started as an electrician, moved to China, but then obviously being in business, I then had to learn business. So I did studies with Curtin University from China back in the 90s. Started doing sort of business studies, and then through to an MBA sort of while I was in Beijing, working in Beijing, and now as I said, continually learning, doing a PhD, or actually doing a doctorate of business administration, specializing on innovation in China. So
amazing. That's incredible, Kent. Wow. I'm absolutely so impressed with how you across all these different facets of your life. It's really inspiring.
Thank you. Yes. No. Like I said, keep myself busy and keep myself learning.
Yes. And Kent, martial arts. Do you still do martial arts?
I haven't, no, for a number of years, unfortunately. I've committed my times to other pursuits. But it's always been a passion and interest of mine. But no, since sort of moving into the business world in China, I did a little bit in China, but not so much. And then sort of keep my eye on what's happening in the world, but in that space. But no, I'm like in innovation or anything in business, you need to sort of pivot and pursue other pathways sometimes, and see where they take you. So I've pivoted and taken a number of different pathways over the years. And unfortunately, martial arts is something of interest, but no, not something I pursue anymore.
Yeah, because I was going to say there's a certain discipline associated with martial arts, and I guess that kind of makes sense how you're able to do so many different things, throughout. I mean, there's only 24 hours in a day, right? So I was wondering if there's any correlation between the two.
I'm sure my grounding in martial arts many years ago has helped my discipline. I believe I'm quite a disciplined person anyway, so that probably helped my martial arts, and is obviously helping my pursuits nowadays. But It's good.
Yeah. And Kent, I'd love to go into the innovation management. So I think a few people, myself sometimes included, people might mention the word innovation. It's a bit like when you say branding, right? People's eyes glaze over. Could you please explain to us what innovation management is?
So innovation management is really, so I'll start from the beginning. Innovation, yes,
Please.
everyone speaks of innovation and has a different definition. And there is
Mm,
no one standard definition of innovation. Although at the Global Innovation Management Institute, we talk about, we have a standard definition, which is creating and capturing new value in new ways. And so it's quite so creating and capturing new value in new ways. That's our definition of innovation. So it's usually to do with sort of the newness, but it's also one of the things most people think about when they think about innovation is it the idea or an invention or so forth? So innovation really, in my understanding and especially in my studies, innovation is really, it's not an innovation until it's either diffused into the market or accepted in the market, commercialized. There's a number of different words you can use. Otherwise, it's still an idea or an invention. So an innovation has to be sort of at that phase. But the innovation ecosystem that we live in, and most people focus on the end result, which is the innovation. So what has come out of the end of an innovation process. Innovation management is what we focus on in innovation management is that process, not the end result. The end result is what you get at the end of the process. So innovation management is the process of innovation from ideation through to commercialization. But more importantly, the process is important, and through the Global Innovation Management Institute, which I said Amy is part of, and I've done a lot of studies through the Global Innovation Management Institute certification around innovation management. It's we have a proprietary framework that Jimmy has sort of developed and utilised globally around the world from major companies, to SMEs and governments. It's understanding that process. But also what's really important in innovation management is the mindset. So
yes.
the innovative mindset of a person, or if you're talking about an organization, which is more towards the innovation management side of things as well, is the culture, the innovative culture within an organization. So innovation management is really around that process, the innovative process that people use either as an individual or an organization. And then also the mindset or the culture within that organization. So that's what we focus on when we do the programs and the certification when it comes to innovation management. So we're trying to bring global best practice here to Australia. What's being already used around the world, bringing that here in Australia, so people can see what processes, tools, and so forth that can be used.
And is there a particular type of client that you work with predominantly?
So with Amy, as I mentioned, as a not-for-profit membership-based organisation, we work with, it's all around, like I said, our deep purpose is really around raising the awareness and understanding what innovation and innovation management is. But what we do also is work with clients. So we have programs. We have a program that's been delivered first time face-to-face here in Australia. I've done it twice, so I'm sort of one of the only certified trainers here in Australia to deliver the Jimmy programs and courses. And one of it's the foundational course is called the Certified Innovation Catalyst. So I did the first face-to-face one in February here in Perth, and also another one recently in May. And there is a number of other programs that we're looking to deliver, but I'll obviously be doing it to begin with, but we'll be training up more people here in Western Australia, and then looking to expand that across Australia, where we can sort of deliver those programs and the certification as well.
And Kent, what would a business owner be experiencing, before what would prompt them to sort of engage with your services?
So it's really anyone that's in innovation. It comes down to the question of why is innovation important? And innovation drives obviously competitiveness. It drives customer engagement. We talk about the different premiums of innovation, and it's like, are you the best company to work for? Are you the best partner to partner with? Are you the best company to invest in? So you've got sort of various premiums that innovation brings to a company. But it drives growth. It drives economic viability, competitiveness, and a number of different things that innovation drives in an organisation. So it's really understanding, first of all, how important innovation is. And
Yes.
a lot of organisations need to sort of start with that. A lot of companies, like I said, or organisations focus on end goal, which is the innovation. And so a lot of people look at companies going, oh, they're a very innovative organisation or company.
Yeah.
And then when I speak to them, they're like, yeah, we are not, we have some great innovative outcomes of what we do, all things that we've done with clients, but we're not an innovative company or organisation because they don't have that process that I was talking about, and also the innovative culture that's in organisations. So that's something we try and work with companies and organisations, whether that be medium to sort of large companies or governments and academia. So one of the things we try to push, not really push, but sort of enlighten people about on the innovation ecosystem in WA to begin with. But like I said, we're sort of I'm talking to people around how we can expand this in Australia. Is the innovation ecosystem is made up of sort of what we call 3 layers. The startup part of the innovation ecosystem, which there's some fantastic things happening across Australia, and especially here in WA, with government support and funding and so forth. That's happening in the startup space and sort of hubs and so forth. But there is more to the innovation ecosystem than startups. So there's startups, there's scale-ups. So they're the medium-sized business that are looking to grow. And then there's the stay-ups. So the stay-ups need to stay up, and that's academia, government, and corporates. If they don't stay up, they fall down. And so if you look at, for example, in the Fortune 500 companies in the last 20 years, so 2003 to 2023, 52% of the Fortune 500 companies are no longer there. So
and that's because they lacked that?
And there's a number of drivers, but the top driver is innovation. That's
so they were lacking that.
Correct, yes.
Yeah.
So that's it's important that companies understand what innovation is, what it means, and how important it is to sort of if you look at we look at the innovation, how important it is, and if you look at sort of we call it the growth gap, and you sort of trajectory goes across of what the company might be doing if you stay as you are, and this is what you do if you focus on innovation, and then you look at what the gap is, and so like how big is that gap, and then look at how important that innovation is. Otherwise, you could be not that we're all Fortune 500 companies, obviously, but if that's what Fortune 500 companies are doing, you can imagine what all the other companies are doing, and sort of not being at the level that they could be if they sort of understood and focused on how innovation is important to growing their business.
So Kent, did you say a more medium to large business is the ones that should be thinking about innovation? I mean, if someone's got a small business, team of 10, is that ideal or not really? I mean, I guess there's some innovation there, right? Or
innovation takes all forms, and everyone should be looking at innovation, from individuals within organizations, individuals as well as individuals within organizations, and then small businesses to, like I said, startup scale-ups, and stay-ups. All of the innovation ecosystem needs to understand what innovation is and how important it is, and everyone should be looking at innovation. So yes, what we do is we deal with the whole innovation ecosystem. We try to connect all levels of the innovation ecosystem, because sometimes a startup, their first customer might be a scale-up or it might be a stay-up. And a lot of them are not talking to each other or connecting. And that's one of our goals at the Australian Innovation Management Institute, is to connect those layers and get people speaking. We want people to have a common framework around innovation. We want people to have a common language. What is innovation? The same definition, a common language. What innovation is. If we can all do that, then I think we'll be in a much stronger position and much more competitive as a state, or even as a country, when it comes to innovation.
And Kent, do you find brand has much impact on innovation?
So innovation can take all forms. I think I mentioned that, but I didn't sort of go into it. So innovation, whether it's in branding, which I'd sort of probably more call positioning, because branding is one part of positioning.
Of course.
Then you look at business models. You look at how you partner with someone. So when we talk about our definition of creating and capturing value in new ways, we also then sort of add on that the value chain. So most people don't look at their value chain or their supply chain. The value chain is either downstream or upstream. So when you look at the value chain, you might have innovative opportunities through partnering with different people up and down your value chain. So innovation can go, and then obviously people then focus more on the technology side. But customer experience, you do innovation in customer experience. There's a number of ways that innovation, like I said, comes in different forms. So yeah, branding is definitely one of the many forms of that innovation can take.
And Kent, what are some of the challenges that you see business owners have with implementing innovation?
Again, it's really having that common language. So sometimes it's driven, we deal with a number of different organizations, companies, large companies, medium companies, small companies, and even governments. Most companies, like I said, some organizations have it in their values, some have it in their vision or mission statements. I mean, it is probably one of the most overused words in Australia, innovation. But most people don't know what it means. And they talk about it, or they have, like I said, vision and mission statements, but they don't actually really know what it means or how important it can be. So I think it really needs to start from the top. It sort of needs to be a top down and a bottom up approach. I mean, top down, executives within organizations and companies, they need to understand what it is to begin with, and know how it's important, because it really does drive, as I mentioned, growth, competitiveness, a number of other things that innovation can do. So if they understand how important it is to their business and realize that, then obviously they'll grasp and sort of support what innovation is within their organization or within their company. And then bottom up is you need the innovation people, all the people within the organization need to understand what innovation is. But if you have certain numbers of people within an organization or a company that are mainly driving innovation, then it's understanding how to do that. And as I mentioned, there's sort of frameworks and tools that we teach within AMI for people on the various programs that we do, so that they can understand that and have a process and a framework that they can follow, and a culture.
I think you've touched on something really, really great there. A lot of people do have that word innovation as a core value. And like you said, a lot of people I don't actually think ever know what it is. If a business owner does have that as one of their core values, and perhaps they want to start honoring it, what would be the first steps?
First step is to really look at, do they have an innovation strategy? So most organizations don't have an innovation strategy. They have a corporate strategy, but do they have an innovation strategy that aligns to their corporate strategy? So having an innovation strategy is always the first step. And it can be quite simple to begin with, and that can be built on. But having an innovation strategy to begin with is really important. So does that innovation strategy address that growth gap I mentioned? First of all, identify what that growth gap is, and then work out what the innovation strategy needs to be to meet that, and sort of what's important for them to invest in when it comes to innovation, what time frame that looks like, because an innovation strategy sort of needs to align with what the corporate strategy is, and like I mentioned, most people don't have an innovation strategy. So starting with an innovation strategy to begin with is the first part, and then once you've got an innovation strategy, then looking at, okay, within my team, within my team members, do I have the capabilities? Do I have the people that can help drive that innovation, to where it needs to be? And if not, then what do I need to do to give them the skills and capabilities to be able to do that?
Yes, it's a bit like branding. If someone rebrands, you potentially will have all these leads coming in. If you haven't got the capacity to actually help honor that or service them, you're going to have a bit of an issue, which can actually destroy a business. So it's quite similar.
Yeah, very, very true.
And
very true.
do you have a particular case study where innovation management has really had a positive impact?
Oh, there's probably hundreds of case studies that we deal with in the Global Innovation Management Institute globally, because they've been around for quite a number of years, and like I said, they're the largest professional organisation globally that as a membership base, but also providing ISO accredited certification, and that's, like I said, SMEs around the world through to large corporate, Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies to major governments. So they have a number of case studies that I've seen and that we deal with here in Western Australia. So the Australian Innovation Management Institute only launched in September last year, so we're not even quite a year old.
Yes, you mentioned.
Yeah, so we've been able to achieve in a short period of time has been fantastic. And like I said, we look to expand this across Australia. But what we've achieved in WA and with the organisations that we've started dealing with, there is the beginnings of case studies, not final, not finalised yet. Most of them are still at their early stages. So we provide events to sort of, with keynote speakers, to raise awareness. So we had a very good event in early May on public sector innovation, for example. And so, Minister Dawson, who's our innovation minister, or the Minister for Innovation and the Digital Economy in Western Australia, is obviously very keen to see, obviously, innovation grow across Western Australia, but obviously public sector innovation. So May was a big month for us, where we did an event on public sector innovation, and we had a couple of very good keynote speakers. One from the Director General, Jody Kent from the Department of Finance, who's an affiliate member of the Australian Innovation Management Institute. We had someone from JITSI, the Department of Jobs, Tourism, Science and Innovation keynote, and then we had a panel, someone from WA Police and someone from the Department of Education, all talking about what's happening within innovation in the public sector. As I mentioned, innovation needs to happen everywhere. So most people don't actually understand it is actually happening in government as well. And as part of our big month in May, we did do the Catalyst course at the end of May, and majority of the participants were from the public sector. But we also, Minister Dawson launched WA Innovators of the Year that the West Australian government has each year on sort of promoting, highlighting innovators within the West Australian ecosystem. For the first time, there is a government or public sector or government innovation category, which the Australian Innovation Management Institute is sponsoring. So now we can highlight what's happening, what innovations are happening in government as well. So there's we've got some movement. And I think we're sort of highlighting some areas of innovation that people don't quite understand. We're obviously delivering global best practice courses for the first time here in Australia, but starting in Perth. And we continue to do that and work with both government organisations and businesses in WA to sort of help them on their innovation journey.
Yes, and I mean, we connected through one of the WA Leaders Illuminate courses. Is that one of the ways you guys do create awareness about innovation?
Yeah, it is. So I will be speaking on, with my sort of Australian Innovation Management hat on. I think it's October. I think with WA Leaders, I'll be talking then. WA Leaders is a corporate partner of the Australian Innovation Management Institute, and we're obviously involved as an industry partner with WA Leaders. So WA Leaders, as you know, the sort of the businesses that are involved in there are sort of what we call the scale up area. And they're our businesses, we believe, that have the biggest chance for growth. Startups are fantastic, and as we know, most startups don't survive, unfortunately. Scale-ups are already established businesses, and so if more scale-ups looked at innovation and how they can innovate their businesses, like I said, whether it's from branding to business models to customer engagement, there's a whole different ways that they can look at in innovation. If our scale-ups could innovate more, then they're the ones that are probably going to have the biggest impact on employment. So as they grow, they're going to employ more people, and they're going to have economic impact within the state. So we see sort of the members of WA Leaders, as well as that whole layer of the innovation ecosystem being the scale-up part, is a very important area that we want to engage with.
And Kent, is there like a line that sort of defines when one's business is a startup and when one business is I can't remember, like a stay-up, did you say? Like, is it a scale-up? Is there a certain, like, how does one gauge where one's business is at?
It's probably various definitions of what a startup, a scale-up, and a stay-up is.
Right.
Startups are really, obviously, very early stage businesses that have either reached an ideation phase, maybe have a little bit of traction, and sometimes there's also talk about sort of later stage startups, which sort of obviously looking for funding and so forth. They've got some traction already and so forth, but they're usually quite earlier stage businesses. Scale-ups are usually established businesses that have been running for a certain amount of time already. They have enough revenue. They're sustainable businesses, basically. They're a sustainable business that's been going for some years, and sometimes looking to scale. And they're looking to scale. They are basically got the model right, and it's now about repeating what they're doing to be able to scale their business.
I see.
But, innovation obviously plays a big role in how that might happen and how they might scale. Stay-ups are really the big corporates that are already been going for many years. The governments and academia we put in that same thing. They're the stay-ups. They're the ones that have to stay up to where they are. Otherwise, they're going to be like the 52% of the Fortune 500, for example. Like I mentioned, that don't stay up, unfortunately, because they then get overtaken by other organisations, or they become obsolete in what they're delivering because things that are happening in the innovation space, whether you're talking about technologies or especially in the artificial intelligence space, you've got a number of things that potentially could interrupt or disrupt the stay-ups that might not allow them to keep staying up. So they need to stay up. They need to keep innovating to stay up.
Of course. And Kent, what challenges have you sort of faced as an entrepreneur? Is there anything you'd be comfortable to share there?
Oh, there's always the road's full of challenges. Obviously, from
top three.
From starting a business in a foreign country and sort of growing a business in a foreign country is
that is so brave. Yeah,
in a different culture and everything else like that. Especially from a country when I moved there in the early 90s to then leaving in sort of 2014. And still being involved many years after that, because I had another business in China that I was traveling back and forth for another 6 years after that. 30 years in China, from seeing it what it was, sort of a very early stage developing country, to being the second largest economy in the world. So lots of challenges in dealing internationally and cross border, and I've done a lot of that, which is probably been the biggest challenge as being an entrepreneur and doing business, because most of what I do is sort of international or cross border. But then, whether you're working now like I do domestically in the First Nation space or in the innovation space, trying to sort of raise awareness here, it's just sort of the biggest challenge is probably just getting people to understand. People to open their mind. I've seen what's happening internationally. I sort of want people here to see what's happening internationally, and for them to grasp it. And I've done a lot of work in my studies around where Australia sits in the innovation ecosystem, globally. And in the last sort of 7 years, I wrote a very short paper. You'll be able to see it on my LinkedIn or the Australian Innovation Management LinkedIn. It's about how Australia's sort of, I think we're ranked 25th now still, but globally. And 7 years ago, we were about the same. We've actually moved sideways. We haven't really gone anywhere in the last 7 years. And there's a number of factors I think where Australia's missing, that's causing that. So it's really, I've seen what people are doing globally through the Global Innovation Management Institute. I'm seeing what's happening globally, and I see what countries are doing. I see what companies and governments are doing. So I'm obviously keen to sort of raise that awareness. That's why we have the Australian Innovation Management Institute, AIMI, and that's one of the biggest challenges as an entrepreneur, or whether it's my entrepreneurial hat or just me as chairperson of AIMI. It's the challenge is sort of getting that awareness out, getting people to understand why it's important that they need to look at innovation. They need to look what the rest of the world are doing. We live in a very comfortable, as you know, a very comfortable city, a very comfortable country, and people sometimes don't realise what's happening in the rest of the world, and that we can't just keep doing what we're doing.
Yes, and again, branding's the same. I find a lot of business owners tend to lack the education or understanding why branding is so important and the impact that it can have on one's business. They may have been in business for 40 years and they've only ever had a logo, but again, it's that education and that understanding of why there's a need for it.
Absolutely, yeah, no, totally agree.
And Kent, if you could go back to your 15-year-old self who left school and give yourself one bit of advice, what would it be?
Very good question. That's a hard one.
I'll give you 2 minutes.
It's a very difficult one.
There
What
might be a
advice would I
few.
there probably is. It's not something I thought. I'm not the sort of person that reflects that far back.
Right.
I focus more on the present and what I'm going to do for the future. But what would I do? I suppose I wouldn't. I do a lot of mentoring in what I do, whether that's through Amy or through the Triangle Equity Partners when we have our Scale Up program, and other things that I do. I do a lot of mentoring businesses. So, it's probably, and I deal with a lot of youth that are sort of, or even startups. So I suppose it's finding your. Well, it's the same for them as the same as probably what I would have been if I was giving my advice to myself at 15.
Yeah, of course.
And at 15, you probably don't know exactly what you want to do, but it's finding your passion, finding something that you really enjoy doing. And sometimes, as you know, you sort of pivot and take different pathways to find that, as I did. But it's finding that passion that really drives you, and finding out what your why is. I think that's really important, and sort of running with that, whatever that might be. I think that's extremely important advice for people to sort of think about. Because I know so many people that are in business or work for businesses and aren't really enjoying what they're doing. But so it's like, well, if it's not driving you or it's not your passion, then you need to find what that is. So I think that's probably the biggest bit of advice I could give someone is finding your why, or finding your passion, and then whatever that might be is running with it as best as you can.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Kent. It's great advice because life is so short, and if you're in a job that you absolutely hate, which was me 4 years ago, and it wasn't my employer's fault by no means. It was just my own drive, wanting more from life, and eventually, just threw the towel in and off I went. And what you said earlier about just sort of going with it as well. Sometimes for myself, I found I'm not even really sure as to why I might be doing something, but then it kind of all works out along the way anyway. So I guess having a bit of faith and trust in oneself also, and that passion really, does pay off.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I've been working with a partner of mine. She's, been in the digital, digital marketing space, social media marketing mainly, and sort of did that here. When we first met in Perth, she's from the UK, and then sort of moved back to the UK, but looking to move back here. And her, she went to a job back in the UK that was interesting, but definitely not her passion, and something she's not enjoying. She's been doing it for a year now, and sort of I've been working with her now to set up this new business because I know that's her passion.
Great.
Found her first sort of 2 clients, or sort of second main client.
Brilliant.
In Perth now to sort of drive that business and sort of helping her on that journey, because I know she's very good at what she does, exceptionally good at what she does. But as most people do, question themselves, and so forth. And so she's obviously very good at the creative side, which then can drive the business. But I'm very good at the business side. So I said, look, I'll help you with that you're not sure of. We'll play to our strengths. You can focus on what you need to do to grow the business, and then help her grow that business. And I know she's very capable of what she does, and I know she'll be able to do a great job at this. Now that she knows I'm covering the sort of things she doesn't know, but she can focus on the things that she's very good at. And so that's her passion, and I know that she'll do extremely well at that because she's, again, playing to her strengths and working with that passion that we talked about. That's so important to sort of to follow.
And it's great to have someone like you in a corner, because again, at art school or, when you're studying graphic design or branding, they don't teach you how to run a business. And that's why WA Leaders, working with Paul Klassen, has been like business changing, because again, I love to paint and draw and do creative stuff, but that business side of things, I was like clueless, so it's really great. And it's great that your partner or client, recognizes her strengths and is working with someone like you, because I think a lot of business owners, they maybe feel like they should know it all. And, I've been blessed with this passion or skill set. But the business side of things, I'm not too sure, but they almost feel, I don't know if weak's the right word, asking for help or teaming up with a business advisor or someone like yourself to actually push things to that next level.
100%. No, I think people do that. They sort of either question their abilities to begin with. Like I said, she's questioned her abilities to be able to, even though it is her passion, and when she's doing that, she's very good at doing it. But then, as you mentioned, then maybe it is a weakness of obviously on the business side of things, and it's like saying, maybe I'm not good enough to run my own, build my own business because I don't understand this. And that's,
Yes.
as you mentioned, that's sometimes where you need either someone like myself with her in her corner, or you know, sort of need to start learning a little bit yourself, or work with advisors or even mentors. You know, quite often, you get mentors that can help you on that side of things to begin with. But yeah, we can't everyone has different strengths, and you can't be good at everything. So it's just understanding that.
No. Definitely. And Kent, where is the best place for our listeners to connect with you?
It's probably unfortunately, the Australian Innovation Management Institute, we have a landing page on a website because we're sort of not-for-profit organisation trying to get some funding to be able to build ourselves a website. But if you were to look on the trianglepartners.com.au is the Triangle Equity Partners website, and that's probably the easiest place to find me. I actually have a personal website. You can also see sort of Kent Matla. I think it's kentmatla.com.
Okay.
It's a personal website which has some of the things I do on there, and you can contact me through that. And obviously I'm on LinkedIn like everyone else.
Great. And Kent, any final words of wisdom before we sign off?
The only final words of wisdom is I think people need to understand what innovation is. I've spoken about it a lot in this session, but
yes, thank you.
I'd really ask everyone to sort of get a better understanding of what innovation is. Look into what innovation is, and how important innovation is to their businesses, and into their life, and what it means within the Perth sense, the West Australian sense, and the Australian sense. Because innovation, although it's important within a business and organisation that you might be working in, you're part of a bigger ecosystem, and it's understanding that whole innovation ecosystem, and how you fit in there, and how they're innovating, and how you can play a part in that, or how you can potentially we're trying to lead in that, so that you can make a difference.
Well, Kim, thank you so much for your time and for all that you've shared. I'm super stoked that this episode is really going to help create education and awareness around innovation. And yes, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure, Tracy.
Take care.